So in really keying in on Revelation 13 and looking at the amalgamated beast, and what is that? That's the first beast that is mentioned in Revelation 13. And that is the beast that has the body of a leopard, it has the mouth of a lion, it has the claws of a bear, and then it has 7 heads and 10 horns, and it's clearly been identified in prophecy as the Roman Catholic system. It's the papal system that truly had adopted all the qualities of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, all the persecuting powers, the stealthful body of the leopard, and its ability to camouflage and to hide, the great jaws in the persecuting power of the bite of the lion. It has the claws of a bear. If you've ever seen the claws of a grizzly, then it has the 7 heads and the 10 horns, and that's all this amalgamated system. And that's why when you look at the Roman Church and you even look at all the symbols, it's all religions all melded together. That's why the Catholic system needed Neoplatonism, the ability to use what's called the law of Hermes, the Hermetic kind of doctrine of looking at all religions and what is the theme of all religions that's played out in maybe the different characteristics of Buddhism or in Hinduism or in Shintoism or in whatever idea that it is. It could be any pagan idea, but it's all culminated or all boiled down into how does this all sync up and link up, and it's really saying all the same thing. Well, that's Neoplatonism, and that is why the system is identified as a harlot, as something that takes in all the religions and amalgamates it and turns it into this system, this dominion theology world religion system called Catholic. Now that's the first beast. Now the second beast, which is a lamb-like beast that rises up from the land, has been clearly identified around the time in which the Catholic beast, that system, it was given its power in 538 when the Ostrogoths were finally defeated by the Roman armies through the Roman Catholic system. It was able to negotiate and able to dismantle a lot of the conflict that was there, and there were treaties involved, and that gave rise to the Roman Catholic system in 538. Now, in the book Revelation, it says that for 1260 day/prophetic years, that this power will rule, and it did rule all throughout Europe, and eventually, made its way into the Americas. But it received a deadly wound in 1260 years later from 538, which is 1798, in which you had Berthier, the general to Napoleon, give that deadly wound. Now it talks about around that time when that wound is healing, that there is a power that is rising up from a, quote, uninhabited land, in which we've discussed. And that power is a lamb-like beast or a Christ-like beast, a Christian-like nation. It's an image of that, but it's not the reality of a Christian nation. And it grows up into this great persecuting power that starts to speak as a dragon. Now, what's fascinating to understand about that power is when you look in the Old Testament under that word for a lamb-like beast, it's the word re'em, R-E'-E-M, and that is the picture of the buffalo. Now, anytime that beast is brought up in the Old Testament, it starts off as a power that liberates God's people. It's first brought up as God identifying himself, and he liberated his people from Egypt. And then from Egypt, Pharaoh couldn't hold them down. It was an animal that can't be tamed. And then many times it's showing that this is a liberating animal, which is exactly what the United States is, and it came up right around the whole late 1700s. But later on, it goes from being an untamed animal in which you cannot put a harness upon, you can't control, to a lawless beast, and gives its power over to the papal power, is what it says in Revelation 13. It hands its power over and reinvigorates the papal system. Now that power started to rise in the late 1700s, and it arose from a designated unpeopled lands in the book of Revelation, even though it was populated. But remember this doctrine of discovery that would not validate the existence of the natives that were here, and wiped them out through disease and conquest and military actions or through enslavement, and they ended up dying in so many terrible ways, but they weren't considered a people. That's the key to understand that Revelation 13 is talking about the Roman Catholic dominion theology system and America, and adopting that dominion theology system into this thing called Christian democracy that is trying to spread throughout this world. Those two powers join together to create this circumstance of end time events in which the whole world is churned up into this great place in which all the winds are unloosed and the great warfares of humanity and the great powers come together to create this ultimate dominion, which is the dominion in which Rome and the United States share, sitting at the top of the throne, ruling this world. That's where we are today.
Revelation 13. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power, and his throne, and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed.
So what we're going to look at is, how did the lamb-like beast in Revelation 13 decide to adopt the same philosophy, the same ideology, the same view of theology, of dominion theology, as the Roman Catholic system did? Protestantism obviously looked at the scripture as a picture of Christ mediating as a high priest in heaven, and the conquered lands is something that's conquered by Christ in the New Jerusalem in heaven, and it's when Christ's return that we're going to see him make a new heaven and new earth, and he's going to populate the new heaven and new earth with, of course, resurrected people with new bodies. Well, this dominion theology getting a hold of Protestantism is actually in history relatively a new concept. It has now shifted into a Roman Catholic dominion theology concept, and it's being played out in the history of America. And so what we're going to look at is what's called the Doctrine of Discovery, built upon the papal bull that said any place you guys discover is an object of conquest and dominion as long as it is for the church. And what we're going to look at is, how did America become the object of conquest for Rome, for papal Rome, and how ironically Protestantism has played into that, to the point that the papal Roman Catholic system and its entire ideology that's being played out in this world today is in complete harmony and symbiotic to the role and the self-identity of the United States and its role in dominion theology throughout this world. Well, what the key to looking at this, and what we're going to look into, is the Doctrine of Discovery that displaced all the Native Americans and deemed the United States as a, quote, Christian dominion for the Roman system. And we're going to look at that very, very important connecting piece of Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13. In 1492, Columbus makes his way from Spain, Portugal, and he hits the West Indies. He meets up with the natives there, and he finds himself amidst great hospitality. He turns around, he makes his way back, he has a meeting with the Pope. The Pope at that time writes up a papal bull. They're just hot on the heels of the Crusades, where they're going out conquering in the name of Christ. They're having these military campaigns, and he writes the papal bull that establishes what's called the Doctrine of Discovery, in which any lands that are discovered by European discoverers that go in the name of the church are able to claim that land as the church's land, and it is a discovery for the church, and those lands can be depopulated and can be brought under dominion and subjugation And that is the beginning of the history of the Americas, and particularly the United States. So let's talk about how the doctrine of discovery in that 1493 Papal Bull started to play itself out in the United States. And it really came from the pushing of the natives across to the west, pushing them west and displacing them and taking people like the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the various Indian groups and moving them west of the Mississippi. And the very a precedent for that displacement, was in fact that Papal Bull of 1493, when natives would go to court and they would say, hey, listen, these lands were promised to us, we made treaties with you, why are you breaking these treaties? The precedent was always, at least as far as legally and in the courts, they'd always go back to that 1493 bull saying, that these are Christian lands and you are heathen unbelievers and therefore you don't have a right to those lands. And one of the most fascinating parts of that story really played itself out in 1823 when actually somebody bought some land from the natives and bought literally millions of acres. And when those lands were in dispute because somebody named McIntosh had actually bought it from the State Department. And so they're both saying, but I bought it legally from the natives. And then one says, well, I bought it from the government. So when it came to court, when Judge Marshall had decided, he accessed and he stipulated that it was based on that Papal Bull that the natives didn't have the right to sell the land, and the judgment went for McIntosh. The judgment went for the man that bought it from the United States, and the United States says it's based upon the fact that this is a Christian dominion institution, and therefore that Papal Bull is the precedent for all territorial law for the United States. Now, for those people that are students of prophecy, that is a hair-raising, horrific reality when the very premise of the United States to make sure that the abuses of Europe that happened in the Roman papal system and the takeover of all the various governments there and then the rise of Protestantism, well, the idea of that is to throw off and to cast off the yoke of Rome from having dominion and from, in some sense, imprisoning the people to the Roman yoke. What's so fascinating is that decision, based on that Papal Bull in the United States, told you, and threw that great message out there saying that there is no true separation of church and state in the United States, that was a protective doctrine that was brought by Jefferson and really emphasized, and that was the idea of Protestantism. But when it comes down to land disputes, it's all really telltale when it comes to the Native Americans in regard to the fact that Papal Bull has said that these lands are lands of discovery for that dominion of the Roman Catholic Church, and that the Native Americans ultimately don't have sovereignty nor the right to own lands here. They're only occupying these lands based on the graces of the United States And the precedence of the United States of having full authority over these lands is built on that 1493 papal bull. The story gets deeper and deeper and deeper as you start to see the ties to Rome and the government of the United States, because in fact Washington D.C. was not first named Washington D.C. It was first named Rome, and it was planted in Maryland and Virgin Mary and Rome. That was supposed to be the very kind of epicenter of this great land. And as you'll see, as the missionaries had run all through the United States and established these, quote, missions or missionaries, and the weaving in of the Roman system into American law that became eventually civil law. As you can see, of what we've been showing you is that fundamentally the three papal bulls that ultimately make up the doctrine of discovery that were instituted by the Catholic Church, in which basically and fundamentally the United States was founded upon that idea, why we were able to displace the natives, and why we basically set up territorial law that way, is founded on the doctrine of discovery that was built on the idea of Christianizing the land. But what is fascinating is a lot of people say, well, the Catholic Church no longer has that kind of legislative influence upon the United States because our law system is built upon common law, which came from the Magna Carta as a result of the Reformation in England. So basically and fundamentally, the United States broke away from the yoke of papal bondage of Europe. Well, here's what's fascinating is we do have in the United States common law. But civil law is also in place too. If you want to bring a civil suit, or there's just fundamental civil laws that were built on the Roman civil law system of Justinian's Code. Now, what's fascinating, what's very important to understand is that the Roman Catholic system of canon law and civil law and the concept of America being fundamentally a Christian nation, a new discovered land to be Christianized in the form of a new Christian republic fundamentally. That might seem distant until you understand the blue laws, the Sunday laws of the 19th century, in which Sunday laws were being passed all through the United States. Well, fundamentally that system is coming from state constitutions and coming from civil codes. And all of that was fundamentally derived from the Roman canons / civil Roman law system. Fundamentally, the underpinnings of, in the micromanagement of the United States, the doctrine of discovery, civil law, and canon law are still alive and active. If you want to look at our Supreme Court judges, most of them are Roman Catholic, and they have been schooled and indoctrinated in canon law and in civil law, along with common and constitutional law. And you will notice that when it comes to making rulings built upon precedent, when the concept of the doctrine of discovery comes in, they will lean upon the precedent set, with Johnson and McIntosh. So it's super important to really understand that it may seem far away, that the Roman papal legislative power is far from the United States. But when people really come to understand that the religious and civil liberties that we felt were so separated and so protected in our nation fundamentally is still very enmeshed. And that's an important thing to understand, that this is a legal precedent that goes all the way back to the doctrine of discovery. And as you will see as we continue on in our series, that there is present decisions being made as recently as 2005 in which the doctrine of discovery is being looked at as the precedents for making legal decisions. So it's still there. It's still in our system, and it's waiting to be implemented at a time of very important spiritual, political, and in all ways a time that's ahead of us in which apostate Protestantism, American politics, and the Roman Catholic Church are all enmeshed into this kind of amalgamated system that we are soon to look forward to. So please stay tuned as we start to put all these pieces together, in which you can see how America and Roman Catholic Church are all playing a part in God's Bible prophecy.